All right. So in this video, we will talk about the last part for the evidence for evolution lesson about the molecular evidence. And by molecular evidence for evolution, it means DNA, as you can see on the picture on the screen right here. This is a great picture to illustrate speciation, first of all, where you have one group over here that has a lot of similar DNA sequences, but then they split. And over time, they get mutations in different spots. And so after 25 million years of being apart and not reproducing thanks to reproductive isolation, now there's two differences between those gene sequences. But then you come back another 25 million years later and now there's four differences. And just like we talked about lots of many times before, the longer they're apart, the more differences should arise, right? And so first off, this wouldn't even work if it wasn't for the fact that we all have the same genetic code, meaning that we all have the four nucleotides, A, T, G, and C. Every single thing that we've ever found, including viruses, uses A's, T's, G's, and C's. And so again, the idea behind that would be that did every single one of the thousands and thousands and thousands of species all stumble upon A's, T's, G's, and C's independently? Or did one thing start with that idea and then everything else is related to that one thing, right? So very early on, something started the whole DNA thing, and then it's been sticking around ever since. This is an example of a homologous structure because there are similarities between our genes and the genes of other species, and they show an evolutionary relationship. So what we do is we look at common genes. We don't look at the whole huge thing. There's tons and tons and tons and tons of nucleotides. But we look at little stretches, especially from genes that are important, that every species needs, like the genes that help you digest sugar, or for mammals to make insulin and things like that, right? And so we took a look at the common genes, and then we count how many differences there are. And the more differences there are, the more distant the relationship is. So you look down here for that data point there for the horse and the donkey, and there aren't very many differences because the horse and the donkey are very similar, much more similar for the horse and the donkey compared to the horse and the cow, right? And so the cow and the horse have more differences than the donkey and the horse. So the donkey and the horse must have had an ancestor that is a lot more recent than the cow. And so the more differences there are, the older, the least related you are to that other species, right? And so that's the basic idea. So let's take this animal, for example. This is called a red panda. And they're called red panda because they live in China in basically the same place that pandas live. And if you look at it, it looks a lot like a regular giant panda, right? There are a lot of similarities. The legs being different colors. It's got the eye colorations on their eyes that are the same. Lots of similarities there. But there's also a lot of differences. And this is kind of like when we were talking about that one animal called the civet that kind of looked like all those different cat, dog, hyena, raccoon kind of thing, that this animal kind of looks like a lot of animals. In particular, besides a panda bear, it would be a raccoon. Raccoon has the same eye colorations. It has the tail with the rings on it, and this one has a tail with the rings on it, right? And so there have been arguments, or there were arguments for a long time about, is the red panda really belong with the pandas, or does it belong with the raccoons? And so far, we've always been using anatomical evidence. What do they look like? What's their body shape? What's their patterns on their fur and things like that? But DNA is the source of all of those patterns. DNA is the source of their body structure. And so when we look at DNA, we can get a little clearer idea of who's related to who. And so here's a black bear just to compare of like, well, if the red panda is related to a giant panda, then is it even a type of bear even? So here is a very simple idea. Like, this is way more simplified, but it's easier for us to understand that we have, we're looking at the same sequence of DNA here, the same gene. And what we want to do is compare and see how many differences there are. So we'll start with the giant panda and the red panda right there in the middle. And as I scan along, I'm noticing that there's a difference right there, and there's a difference right there, and there's a difference right there, right? So there's 3 differences between the giant panda and the red panda. On the raccoon, we go down and there's 1 difference right off the bat. Then there's another difference right there. And that's it. So there's only 2 differences between the raccoon and the red panda. And so the red panda and the raccoon are more similar by DNA. It makes sense that it would be a hard question here, or a hard answer, because the giant panda has only 1 more difference. But the DNA points to the red panda being more related to the raccoon. And so here you get a cladogram based on this idea that red pandas and raccoons, they can trace their lineage way back there. And that's from the first split. So like here's this common ancestor down here of all the bear group. And notice that the raccoons are being sort of lumped in here with the bear group. They're not bears, but they are very similar to bears because the ancestor kind of looked a lot like a small raccoonish looking thing. And if you think about it, bears are kind of just like really big raccoons. And so one group went off to be the raccoon and red panda group, and the other group went off to be the most of the other things that we would call bears, right? And so the DNA evidence points us in the right direction and helps us to understand the commonalities and the relationships about where these animals are related to, right? And so that will help you to fill out this, right? So here's the worksheet, and you have to go through and you have to count all the differences. Now it says to highlight, but you can't do that, at least not easily, because I made it a picture instead of copying everything and making its own table, which I probably should have done. So you don't have to highlight it here, but what you can do is come down and make another table. I've already fixed the sheet to make it work better, but a lot of you have already made a copy of this. And so I got rid of the other table. You don't have to get rid of it, just add another table and then you can put your answers right into there, right? By counting the differences between the sequences here, right? And so that should help you with that. There's 1 last page to fill out on the worksheet, and then that is it. So let me know if you have any questions.